Okay, we're going to get going. Manny, one of our heroes, is going to be still working on the sound, but we're going to get started here. And just thank you all for coming. My name is Mike Kinman. My pronouns are he, him. I'm the rector here at All Saints Church. And I'm going to vamp for just a minute because Steve is supposed to open us with a prayer. So, and actually, I will go ahead and just sort of do my piece here first. First of all, welcome to everyone online. Everyone turn and wave at the camera over there to everyone online. Thanks so much for coming. Most of you, many of you know that for the past 2 years, we have had two groups operating in this congregation, just teams doing amazing work that we're calling Telling the Whole Story groups. And this is out of actually the phrase comes out of a sermon that our friend Bishop Jennifer Baskerville-Burroughs preached at the consecration of Bishop Dion Johnson in Missouri, actually at my old place at Christ Church Cathedral, where she talked about the history of that building. And it was a building that the building itself, the money that came for that building,
who died before entering the promised land.
I think we heard.
Lee never entered the
We're hearing
promised
that.
land of a truly.
We're hearing that fine, so I think that's fixed. And it was the building, the money raised to build the building was raised by money earned from labor tortured out of black bodies. And that's a story that needed to be told. And what she said is you have to tell the whole story so you can write a new story, so you can tell a new story. And so what we started talking about here is how do we do that at All Saints Church, and framing it in terms of our theology of reconciliation. Now, reconciliation is a sacramental rite in the Episcopal Church. We participate in it every Sunday when we have the confession and absolution, but there's actually more steps than that. The first step is self-examination. And self-examination is what it sounds like. It's taking a look at ourselves, and it's also listening. It's listening to each other and listening for ways where we might have sinned. Now, that word is a loaded word, and many of us have had that word weaponized against us. The heart of that word sin, it comes from the Greek. It actually means to miss the mark. And that means, like, think of like an archer aiming at a target. And you can aim the best you can, and if you're like me, you're still going to miss. So it actually has nothing to do with intent. It has to do with the fact that you've tried and you've missed, and it's about breaking relationship. It's about breaking relationship with God, with each other, with ourselves, with the creation, in a way that wounds. And so what we do is we look inside ourselves, and then we listen around us to those who, through our actions or our inactions, we might have wounded. And then we do the second piece, which is confession, which is we identify, well, what were the wounds and where have we wounded it? And again, that's an organic process of listening. You know, if Monique comes up and punches me in the face, and I do sort of self-examination as I'm rubbing my nose, and then I identify, or Monique identifies the sin as, oh, I offended you, and I'm like, okay, you kind of did, but the real sin was you punched me in the face. And so, we have to come to agreement, and it is always the person who is wounded who has the primary voice. And then we look at what does repentance and reparation look like? What does it mean to repair that? And, Monique can say, and I'm choosing you because I love you, so thank you for being a good sport. So Monique can say, oh, here, well, let me buy you a cup of coffee. And I'm like, no, how about you pay my medical bills? And we work with that. And then we move on to amendment of life, which is, well, what do we do so you don't punch me in the face again? And maybe I said something to Monique that got her really mad. Yeah, you're not having a trouble imagining this, are you? And that made her, and so it's like, oh, okay, so this is how we mend our lives and change things so that this won't happen again. And then we have absolution, which is basically saying, are we cool? We're cool now. Now we can do life together, and we can share life together, and that's that process. And of course, it's a process that goes over and over again. because we always, we keep breaking a relationship with each other no matter how hard we try, because again, we just sort of miss the mark. So we did 2 of these groups, and you heard from the first one last month, and I see Hannah Earnshaw, they're over there, and that was on the land that we now occupy, and just an extraordinary piece of work, really going back to thousands of years for the history of this land. The second group, which Steve Williams and I have been co-chairing, is looking at the stained glass windows and the iconography in our church. And that group is still completing its work. And one of the things we realized is that we have a lot of feelings about these windows. And that's natural. It is a part of our worship space. And so what we realized we needed to do, instead of doing what we did with the land group, which is sort of presenting a report, we needed to do some things to build a context for the congregation on this. A couple years ago during COVID, the Racial Justice Ministry presented a remarkable session on the psychology and spirituality of white iconography. And that's really what you're going to be seeing a part of today, because a lot of y'all didn't have a chance to see it then, and we're going to be adding some things to it. And then we're going to be also talking about other contexts that we're going to be adding, because in order for us to look at our windows and tell the whole story of how they got here, how they've stayed here, and the impact that they've had, we need some context about the psychology and the spirituality of when we worship in a space that has all white iconography. We need to look at the history of race, and particularly anti-black racism, within the Episcopal Church. We need to look at that history in Pasadena and in Southern California and in this country. And so really over the next couple months, we're going to be doing that, and this is a first step with that. And so, Steve, are we ready? Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to you, and you're going to pray us in and get us going. Mike.
We forget sometimes. Hello, hello. I don't hear that. Oh, excellent. That's great. Thank you very much for being here. I really appreciate it. I'm just going to start this off a little bit with a small devotional and a prayer, okay? Just so that we can get into the right space here. And it's a devotion that I refer to that has really, I think, speaks to what this journey is all about. And it is from a devotional called Our Bible app. And it's by Shelley Carter Wilson. It's called Enlarge the Tent. And the scripture is, enlarge the place of your tent, and let them stretch out the curtains of your dwellings. Don't spare it. Lengthen your cords and strengthen your stakes. This is Isaiah 54:2 from the New King James Version. And the devotion that Shelley basically writes here, just to set up the prayer, is, Lent is a perfect time to tell the truth. I don't know anyone who claims to adore all the members of their family. I don't. But that doesn't make us any less related, or from a divine perspective, any less accountable. Today we're making the first brave step in obedience, enlarging the tent. Before we can invite anyone in, we must prepare not only the space around us, but the space within us. The Color of Compromise, author Jameer Tisby, demands that the American church confront its bigoted legacy. Christian complicity with racism remains in the present, even as it has taken on subtler forms. Racism is only the beginning. In interviews, he says, it's not just what we do, it's what we don't do. It's not what we say, but what we don't say. Bigotry comes in a variety of shapes and sizes. The reality is this: if the American church does not embrace an intersectional gospel, one affirming all orientations, identities, and expressions, then they don't need a bigger tent. We do. The principle of liberation theology and all of its iterations demands that we contextualize faith as it relates to oppression and inequity. Biblical principles call us to compassion and affirmation for all of God's children, while working to dismantle the systems that continue to harm and oppress relentlessly, like Jesus. So, American church, are you telling us that Isaiah was wrong? Do this one thing: commit to seeing all of God's children. God dwells in you. Lord, lead us forward with baby steps, if necessary. It's not just what we do, it's what we fail to do, not what we say, but what we actually omit. Our greatest desire is to be welcomed with, "Child, well done." We earnestly beseech thee, teach us to let go, lest we be dragged, because the kingdom of God is bigger than our ignorance, and we desire a place in your tent. Amen. Amen. So, along with what Mike was saying in terms of the introduction, in terms of what we're going to do, this was something that we did during the COVID, and it really was inspired, or maybe not inspired, but kind of it blew up after the January 6th events. There's a little precursor I'll tell you about, but ultimately it was really seeing that and watching the screen and saying that, you know what? Those people are speaking to us silently in a lot of different ways, right? With the images, the flags, the things that they were wearing, they were saying something silently that they wanted us to have an impact on us and what we was and who we are. And fear is mainly what it was. And it was a message of, one, we're in charge, this is our space, and we're going to take whatever it is. It was very aggressive. That made me think quite a bit about, well, how do we relate to this? Because am I in a fog from this? Also, my own particular journey was that in 2016, I wanted to really figure out my parents' own journey, right? My parents who, were part of the migration and came up from the South, Louisiana and Texas, and they came into the big city, and they made decisions about where they live, what they could access and what they could do, thinking that they were making decisions based on everything they had. What they did not realize, and I think Isabel Wilkerson in her book, A Warmth of Other Suns, really talks about what that risk was when people migrated from the South to the North and were not prepared to deal with the subtleties and the the unknown, unseen messages about living in those cities, and became victims in a lot of situations. So I really wanted to know what were the issues that my parents were, and so I started off on a journey on a documentary project. And the documentary project had to do, it's called The Dream Deferred, and the documentary project really had to do with the design of American cities and the spaces that we exist within them, and the subtle messages and the restrictions that existed in those spaces that shifted us in areas that we didn't necessarily want to go, but ultimately we found ourselves in. Of course, a couple of months ago, we had a forum here that really talked about redlining, right? That's one of those things, but it's not the only one, right? And it's, I say this because we did, I think Monique, as a matter of fact, had Brian Barry over at Caltech. And he did a presentation because Brian Barry he teaches at Pacifical College. He's a historian, and he has a really incredible presentation that he's done about the history of Black Pasadena. Okay, and Alma Stokes was a part of that, as a matter of fact, who I understand is celebrating her birthday today. 40 or 46 years at All Saints. I don't know. I think that's what it was. Both. Yeah, both. So one of the things that was interesting about that presentation was I have lived in Pasadena for 30 years, over 30 years. I did not know what Brian presented about the history of this city that I've lived in, right? And after the presentation was over, and it had to do with the community that was disappeared on Vernon Avenue and the thriving African American community that lived in Pasadena, healthy, that was bulldozed over, and the decision was made to put the 210 freeway in there and the 710 extension, which obviously never came to fruition, but yet it destroyed a thriving community. They're just getting to this right now because they have a commission established to deal with reparations and the consequences of that. But the point that I want to make about it, that there was a gentleman in that presentation that was from Caltech. I think he must have been a professor or an engineer or whatever. At the end of that presentation, he says, I have lived in Pasadena for 64 years. I have lived across from Caltech, and this is the first time that I'm hearing this. How come I do not know this? Now, in context and stuff, that we're in a time right now where obviously the weaponization of who gets access to history is really quite dramatic. In fact, it reminds me of Germany in 1934, the burning of the books and the burning of information. What's going on in Florida right now and now being adopted across the United States is a battle. Whoever would have thought that librarians would be the other, right? But yet we have that right now. So I make that into context because the title of our presentation today is Racial Justice Ministries Are Telling the Whole Story, the Impact of Imagery of White Supremacy in the Episcopal Church. When I was thinking about this, it may seem like it's a flash kind of title, and when you use words like this, they're triggering kind of words and stuff. But when I really thought about it, you know what the most powerful words on here are? Telling the whole story. That's really one of the biggest things that I think, and the challenge is that ultimately, what does that really mean? I mean, telling the whole story ultimately means that there's a portion of the story that has not been told, right? And that we've basically been in a situation where, and it doesn't make a difference whether you're black, white, Asian, Latino, whatever, we've all been in that situation. We came up through public schools. We came up through those spaces, and we didn't know that that information was already filtered, right? So I think the challenge is for us is telling the whole story is an active thing, and it is also we can't give that responsibility up to somebody else. We have to take that responsibility ourselves and look into it. Fortunately for me, I have a really sickness and whatever is that I ask too many questions. I can't stop, and it really bothers me. But it's really helped me as a documentarian because one of the things about the documentarians is that you have a story, you have an issue that you want to explore, but you cannot take the first thing you find out as truth. You have to dig deep because a lot of times the surface has been the cover, and it covers things up, right? And you have to dig down into it to really do that. So our journey from Claire and I is we haven't been at All Saints. We're not cradle to the grave Episcopalians, right? We've been here 6 years as Episcopalians. And in the end of the day, I think that helps out, right? Because one of the things about the length of anything, when you're a part of it, there's a complacency about it. You get used to it. You don't notice things. And you're going to see that because part of the things that we're going to do here, we're going to look at two groups. We're going to look at St. Paul's Church from Richmond, Virginia, right? And we're going to look at the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C. that had to deal with similar issues, and we're going to hear some of the parishioners talk about when they were confronted with these sort of things. So, and I'm going to move on to that. So one of the things that our journey, Claire and I, started was when we became members of the church and I got onto the vestry, we went to an event in San Antonio. It was called the SEEP Convention. And I think I have one of the things, I'm a little stepping ahead here, and we'll go to it. But the thing about it was the first time we'd been to an event where there were a lot of Episcopal organizations. When we were there, we went and there was a presentation on St. Paul's about what happened in 2017? No, 2015. Where was the Charlottesville. Right, 17. It was the Charlottesville, and then after that, it was the Mother Emanuel, the massacre at Mother Emanuel Church, and yes, 15. And so it woke up the crowd and their own particular church about what to do, okay? That was an inciting incident that sort of shook the dust off. And so what I'm going to challenge everybody in terms of our basically thing is to look at that and try to think about All Saints in that context, right? What is our inciting incident? Why is this something that we should be? What is our driver in terms of that? So one of the things I wanted to play is this. Okay, I need sound. Hello? Mm-hmm. Okay, here we go. Let me go back here. All right.
Speaking in closing, I promise, but personally, I come to this weekend as a moment for accountability. I don't have a right to celebrate Dr. King's life without calibrating my response to his witness. His bending arc of justice sets a high bar for a person of privilege. So I'll say that our diocese has, to paraphrase Canon Edwards Acton, its own work to do. First, reckoning with our legacy of racism. Some of our churches in our diocese were founded for people of African descent and by people of African descent who were barred from Episcopal churches in their own neighborhoods. We have some more truth to tell about that. And second, Dr. King himself invites us to heed Mayor Bass's clarion call on housing justice.
Okay, that was Martin Luther King Day this year. That's the bishop of our diocese, right? I think it's very important that ultimately, and that he brought that up. There's an underlying thing in here that we have not discussed here at All Saints. I will be challenged, and challenge me. He was talking about All Saints. That is All Saints. It is the unknown elephant in the room that we've lived with for a very long time here. And it is a part of telling our own story, and we cannot move forward until we address it. But if you look at the collateral and the history of All Saints Church and all the forms where it is, Wikipedia, on the YouTube, whatever, it is missing. It is a void. It's a gap. So who is going to tell the whole story? We really need to address it. That's a challenge. I'm going to tell you. So when I saw that and when I was there, the other thing about it, which he didn't allude to, the fact that that took place at Christ's, the Good Shepherd in Lamert Park, it was a very contentious thing that it was specifically made a point not to have a ceremony like that at All Saints Church. Okay? Because of All Saints' history with St. Barnabas. And they didn't feel, the other UB churches, that it was proper to not have it in a place that was authentic. Now, I'm saying that. I'm Episcopalian. I'm a member of All Saints Church, right? That was something to me to say, hey, look at, wow, I need to know a lot more about this and how we can move through it. And we've had conversations about that, Mike and I. So check, put that on, telling the whole story. We need to address that at the end of the day, okay? But how did it get to that? That didn't happen arbitrarily. And I think we're going to get into that. So here is something I want to say up front. I want to say this up front. This is not going to be about that. All right? We are not going to do a tour of the church. We're not going to talk about the stained glass windows today. They are doing that, right? And as Mike said, the Telling the Whole Story Committee is. So I just want to give you that. If you came here to say that we were going to do an accounting of the windows, I'm just letting you know you can get a donut and you can leave right now. That's really okay. Okay? All right? What I wanted to do was to get into this, the issue of we had a forum here not too long ago from Christian, it's called the Power Worshipers, right? And one of the things was really doing some education on how the message of Christianity has been co-opted and weaponized, and we are kind of like lemmings and not really addressing it. It's this noise that's really out there, right? But yet the impact of it is really damaging from the standpoint of it. And so, if you look at it, the signs, the type of flags, and all those sort of things are that iconography that they use, the deification of a president, flags and those sort of things. Those are gross. Those are obvious. Those are, obvious from the standpoint that we see them visually and whatever. But I want to challenge you also that sometimes it's not so obvious, right? We can be in spaces where we don't know why we're affected. I remember someone talking about the Confederate monuments that were throughout the East and the South, and the argument always was they don't hurt anybody, they're just statues and yada, yada, yada. But nobody really talked about that. All those families that were enslaved, that lost, that did not make it through that, had to drive by those statues every day. And what did that do to them emotionally? What did that do to them, right, to be able to endure seeing those every single day? It was more than people wanted to admit, right? Because ultimately, the majority race who were around in that time saying, I just ignore them. Oh, they're just in the background. I just see birds on them. Whatever that is. But it was more than that, okay? And I think that we can't dismiss the spaces that we're in and not be aware of that, okay? So this was the SEEP conference right here, which has changed its name now, okay? They rebranded to a whole nother thing. But I want to skip ahead here. I want to skip ahead real quick before we get to the video. The House of Bishops. The House of Bishops, and I knew nothing about the House of Bishops when I came here. The House of Bishops, we're going to read some documents here. They were given the task by the Bishop Michael Curry, right, to really go down and do a deep dive and find out about the Episcopal Church's complicity in white supremacy and what to do about it. And this is an extensive report. It's 52 pages long. We're going to make it available, okay, to everybody. We're going to put the link up so that you can read it. It's very, very extensive and really quite well done. Now, who are the House of Bishops? Since I didn't know, and I know Susan Russell teaches that in Episcopal 101, but this is pretty, I think we need to know that these are not just weekend players. All bishops of the Episcopal Church, active and retired, make up the House of Bishops. The House of Bishops has nearly 300 active members and comprises half of the governing body of the Episcopal Church. Like the governing body of the United States, and remember that, the governing body of the Episcopal Church, called the General Convention, is comprised of the houses, right? The houses of bishops and the House of Deputies. They meet and act separately, and both houses must concur to adopt a legislation. General Convention meets every 3 years, and yada, yada, yada. What does that sound like? It sounds like our own Congress. There's a reason for that, because the United States, the founding fathers were Episcopalian. They were Anglican, right? The church was what really was the governing, and the influencers. I mean, the House of Burgess was really kind of the first vestry that really existed, but yet they were involved in the governing of it, because ultimately the Church of England runs the government. And so there was a split here because they wanted to split church and state, right? However, the Anglican Church didn't necessarily have the money, although these were the wealthy people. They had power. They represented the power class. And I think that's something for us to really understand, because the conflicts that existed in our country about North and South, slavery and all those sort of things, the Episcopal Church was complicit in those and struggled with those. So I think we need to not separate ultimately the things that are going on in this country with the history and the body of the Episcopal Church. I just want to read a couple of these things that from the couple of the bishops. It says, where is it? Okay, here he goes. We're at 9:30. Oh, okay. So the first thing I should have said to everybody is that we're not going to finish. All right. So I should have basically said that, because you can't start a conversation, right, and not say, this presentation was an hour and a half when we did it, 3 breakouts, and a lot of time for a conversation. So just understand that. So I'm going to try to, and I don't want to skip ahead, because you know why? I won't be telling the whole story. All right? So we're going to have to, we're going to have to figure that. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So what I want to move down to is just a couple of comments here. In fact, I'll just use Jennifer here. This is Jennifer. Jennifer Baskerville Barrows. She says, I have to confess I am weary, because we have been doing this for a long time, and there is so much more to do. And Indianapolis Bishop Jennifer Baskerville Burroughs, who in 2017 became the first black woman to serve as a diocesan bishop, since then, several more dioceses have elected black women and other members of people of color as bishops, though the body is still overwhelmingly white male. Baskerville, she was the inspiration in terms of, and we'll read the telling the whole story, her comment on it. I bring up the House of Bishops because this is significant. There are times that I hear people being tired of the sermons and the messages that come from telling the story. And the edict for the House of Bishops was to create data, create messages that can be filtered down into the church so that there would be context for people to use in their sermons, right? It isn't an arbitrary thing, and I know I'm saying this for Mike and our ministerial staff and stuff, is that ultimately this was a top-down edict, right? And to do it in a way that was academic and very well researched, okay? So let's go down here. Okay, here we go. So what I want to do is let's play this, and then we'll talk about it for a second. It's 4 minutes.
What if in this last summer of the sesquicentennial of the American Civil War, we begin a conversation here at St. Paul's about the Confederate symbols here in our worship space? The Lee windows there that identify Robert E. Lee with Moses. First, the young Moses casting off the pharaonic power, the power of the pharaohs, as Lee refused command of the Union Army. Then above, as the old Moses who died before entering the promised land, as Lee never entered the promised land of a truly independent southern nation. What do those images say? What do those images say about us? To someone in particular, a person of color, who walks in off the street? To begin with, are we willing to have the conversation and to do so in a way that honors the dignity of everyone involved in the conversation?
I was a little shocked and felt like I was blindsided. I wasn't expecting that type of thing to come from a sermon. I think that's more of a private conversation to have through an email or let's talk about this. We wonder, what on earth is he talking about, and is this going to create a division before it even got started?
We had two great questions we asked. When did you first notice we had this in our church? And what do you think about it? And the recollections just poured out for people, and they were surprised to learn from each other. They bonded, they cried, they shared, and we did it again a few times, and it really helped us to sort of chart a course.
That, I think, was really eye-opening for a lot of people. And we had some questions that they had put together for us. We talked about those questions, and we realized that we weren't all on the same page. And it gave us an opportunity to figure out how we need to address that first. We need to fix our own stuff, be sure of our own things before we could even begin to offer healing and reconciliation to anything else in the world. The fact that we're doing this, that we are digging into our history and telling the real story and telling the full story, telling the whole story, and that we're doing it in a way that is both honest and respectful of each other, I see God in that every time we meet. I see God in that every time we sit down to talk about these things. In my own journey, this has been the place where I have felt closest to God.
It has been painful. It's not been pleasant. But everything we do isn't pleasant and can often be worth fighting for. But you won't do that if you don't give it a try. You can't let fear of, I'm going to lose membership, I'm going to lose pledges. Yes, we have. We've lost membership. We've lost pledges. We've lost those things that are financial, but we've maintained a lot of love and a lot of hope.
Okay. What we're going to do, because of where we're coming up, I'm going to bring up Betty Cole right now. Where's Betty? We're going to do a little exercise. You've got pencils and papers, but I want you to put it down as a bookmark that we're going to continue the conversation, okay? We're going to schedule another time so that we can get to the end of it, and maybe it won't be in a form. Maybe it'll be on a day where we can have a little bit more of an extended time to really deal with this and get into small groups and talk about it among ourselves, okay?
Good morning, All Saints. So this is just a quick responsive activity, and it is entirely for your, at the moment, for your own self-reflection. And it's an activity I've done many times in different circumstances with different people. So that's what I'd like you to do, is to just take this piece of paper we gave you and divide it into 2 large columns and 1 small column on the right side. So just, you're going to get 3, or, if you're doing it on your phone, you'll have to figure out a different way of doing it. But they're going to have 3 different things you're going to respond to. First question, so the first column. Okay, it's going to go very quickly. So this is not your reflective side. This is just your gut level response. So I'm going to give you 1 minute only, and it's to respond to this prompt. When I see these images, when I hear this talk, the feelings that come up for me are, I feel, quick, 60 seconds. Stop. When I see, for example, myself, if I see an image of torture and I say, what feelings come up? I go, fear, anger, whatever. So you just saw images, you heard things, what feelings came up? It's what we've already been provided. Okay, all right. Second, when I look at those feelings described, the things that came up, when I look at that list and reflect for just a moment, what happens in my body in response to those feelings is what? So it might be I notice my stomach clenches, my toes curl, whatever it is. Stop. Right, before we get to the third column, I'm just going to invite you to just shout out anything from the first column that came up for you, if you feel brave enough to do that. So for me, it might be grief, sadness, anger, anything else that people just willing to just shout out. What? Okay. Okay. Fear, frustration, curiosity, impatience, shame, disgusted, rage. A good thing to be doing. All right. So all of those things. Now, for some people, this is actually challenging because that's not how they process things immediately. But just if you did notice things in your bodily reaction, what are some of the things that you noticed? I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. Anxiety, constriction, what? Tension, clenching your jaw, clenched fists, stiff neck. What? Release. Tearfulness. Dread, hopelessness. Okay. What? Taking your breath away. Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I missed that. Relief. All right, so third column. Just give this a little bit of reflective time. When I feel those feelings in my life, my most usual go-tos are, when I feel those feelings in my body, my most usual go-tos are. So for me, depending on what it is, it might be, I change the subject. I run away, I distract myself, I play a game, I sing a song. But whatever it is, just think about that for a second. Okay, so what are some of the things that came up for you that you noticed? sorry, what? Avoidance. Shut down. And then speak up, all right? Strategizing, planning. I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. Resistance first, and then resentment first, and then action. They might be related. Good, okay, thank you. Wanting courage. Get angry. Distracting humor. I'm sorry, what? Pray.
The deep feeling, I am sorry.
A deep feeling, I am sorry. Cry. Deep breathing. Okay. Calming music. Okay, the feeling of being so pervasive, so overwhelming. The need for calming music, for recentering, for deep breathing, all of those kinds of things, okay? So one last thing, as we're going to just turn the page over for a second, and we're going to end with this. Beyond those feelings, beyond those customary responses, what spiritual practices can I call on to cope with all of this in the ways that are the most healing to the body of Christ? What spiritual practices can I call on or ask for that are most healing to the body of Christ? Taking all of this into account, just ask that question. We're leaving that page blank, because that's for you to take home, hang on to this piece of paper, because we're going to revisit this as the next thing that we do together on this. So thank you very, very much for your courage and participation.
Thank you so much, Betty. And I know Mike is going to close this up. I do want to show a couple of references that if people want to really get a little bit more into it. The first one is a book called from Gail Fisher Stewart, called Black and Episcopalians. She was here at the church. We actually did a book reading of this that was quite transformative. The second one is a book by Harold Lewis, and this is one of the definitive books of African Americans' contribution in the Episcopal Church. It is called Yet with a Steady Beat. It is really fabulous, and as a matter of fact, Gail uses it as a reference. This is a little bit more academic, but it's very important to the conversation. Hearts of Fire, which is from Bill, right? Yeah, Doulis, and from about the Regas years at the church, but also has some very interesting history about the early years at the church, which is good to know. And then the last one is by Granier Shattuck, which is Episcopalians and Race. Okay, so we could put those up on our website and whatever if you do want some additional material to reference to do that. Yes.
Right.
Yes, it is.
Let me talk a little more about that. First of all, I really encourage, if there's one of these books to read, I would encourage everyone. In fact, if we can just make it our summer read as a church, it's Black and Episcopalian by Gail Fisher Stewart. And then she's a friend of ours at All Saints. She's been here via Zoom in the forum. And we want to have her here in the fall. So Gail, if you're watching, come on down. We'd love to have you here. It's a super important book, and if you're feeling a little frustrated, like, well, we didn't get to really talking about iconography in the windows, I feel your frustration, and this was really important, and we're going to need to keep doing this. Part of telling the whole story is, as you start to tell a little bit, you realize how deep it goes, and that you actually have to dive deep, and it takes time. And why I love, and Betty, thank you for giving us that exercise, is as we name these uncomfortable feelings, and I'll just use my I voice here. I am used to having the kind of power over my life that I can control whether I'm uncomfortable or not. That actually is a part of privilege. And so when I feel uncomfortable, I want to do the thing that gets me out of that feeling and gets me back into comfort as quickly as possible. During the Ferguson uprising, I was talking with the Reverend Tracy Blackman, who's another good friend of ours at All Saints Church, and I was wanting just to do something to fix it. And she said, no, your job right now is to sit down in your discomfort. And that's not a self-flagellating thing. That's not a shaming or a punishing thing. It is just sort of, okay, allow yourself to be uncomfortable because that's where change happens. And so and the good thing is we don't sit alone in our discomfort. We sit together in our discomfort. And then part of what I realize is that there are people who have been uncomfortable for a long time while I have been comfortable. And then I can dive into that feeling and I can build empathy and I can listen more. And so we're going to have other sessions of this. And I'm thinking maybe we do need to do it after church and have something to eat and have it when we don't have to like end by a certain time. And I know Keith is like I got to get over and stream that. And if we start the 10 o'clock 5 minutes later, so it's not going to be the end of the world. Yeah, it's not. It's okay. It's okay. But really, I think what we did today was good, and I invite you to sit with that. And in a next stage, we are really going to be looking at some of the psychological and spiritual impacts of white iconography, and as you said, as images of white supremacy in the church. We're going to be looking at that. And we're going to be looking at some of the history, and we're going to be looking at telling the story that you referred to about St. Barnabas and about race here in Pasadena. And it's going to take a while to do this. And as those feelings come up, to just chart them. And first of all, to know that you are beloved of God, that you are made in God's image and beautiful. I always remember if shame is one of those feelings that comes up, what has been really helpful for me is the teachings of Pema Chodron, who is a Buddhist teacher. And Pema reminds us to befriend shame and have shame be your teacher. And so when I feel shame, I have to ask myself, well, what's that about? And what does it have to teach me? But then I learn what it has to teach me the best I can, but then I let it go. Because the shame piece is saying something about the shame piece is saying something about me other than that I'm made in the image of God and beloved. And yet it shows that there is a disjuncture happening between how I'm living and that image of God. And so really, I encourage you to keep that piece of paper. We are going to keep scheduling some new things. We have really the forum scheduled all the way through June, so I think we're going to have to find another time to do this, but I think that's going to be a good thing. And I do want us all to start, if you haven't, looking at the iconography in our church and asking some of the questions that we heard on this video. And maybe having conversations with each other about how this makes us feel, and what is normative for us, and what does that mean. And so I want to thank all of you for coming. This is one of the first steps in this journey. It's one that we are taking together, and I hope that we can all take it together because everyone's voice in this is valuable. And so thank you very much. And we're going to let everybody go. Thank you, and thank you. Let's give Steve a hand here. Thank you to Steve.